The discovery. Theos never wanted attention. He was perfectly content being a dirt-streaked, overworked, underpaid apprentice foreman who mostly just tried not to break things. Dragolos 9 was a backwater terraforming site orbiting a dying red dwarf, known more for dust storms and equipment malfunctions than for glory. He spent his days running cable lines, patching coolant leaks, and carrying his data pad like it was a shield against being yelled at. He wasn't impressive, not strong, not brave. He hadn't even finished his mechanical studies back on Uran Station, just kind of slipped into the job when someone smarter got vaporized in a magnetic core collapse. It was during a routine plasma spool haul down a collapsed ridge that Theos first noticed the smoke curling up from the East Trench. This wasn't the kind of smoke that came from machinery. It was thicker, slower, almost alive, like something waiting for someone to get close enough to ask a question it had no words for. Curious, and honestly just looking for an excuse to delay his checklist, Theos followed the trail down a ravine he didn't recognize on his map. That's when he saw the bones. At first, it looked like jagged obsidian jutting out of the trench wall. Then the light shifted, and he saw the curve of a jaw, a skull bigger than his entire living unit. Cracked armor plating, teeth like melted blades, the entire body half buried with magma steam rising around it like breath from a monster dreaming of something cruel. Dead, he thought. Definitely dead. Except then one eye opened. It was molten amber, not glowing, burning. Not angry, just awake and watching him. Theos stumbled back so fast he fell onto his spine, smacking his oxygen pack against a rock and knocking the wind out of himself. But the dragon didn't lunge. Didn't roar. It sniffed, a low, breathing rumble rolled from its throat, a sound not meant for human ears but not hostile either. Just inquisitive. Theos froze, his heart threatening to launch through his chest. Then, impossibly, it moved. Its massive skeletal body shifted in slow, agonizing motion, ribs creaking like old gates, wings dragging through slag, a tail scarred with melted fusion scoring. It crawled not toward the sky, not toward freedom, but toward him. Each motion deliberate, controlled. And then, without sound, it lowered its head beside him and stopped. Staring. Waiting. Like a cub looking up at a face it recognized from somewhere far away. Theos didn't know what to do. So, like an idiot, he whispered, "Hey." The dragon's eyes narrowed, and then it made a deep, satisfied noise. It pressed its head gently, impossibly gently, into his chest. And it didn't leave. Not for a second. The bond. Theos tried to go back to work like nothing had happened. He really did. He climbed up the ridge, crossed the compound perimeter, and returned to the pump station, hauling nothing but dust and a confused expression. Supervisor Krell barked at him for being behind schedule and threatened to revoke his oxygen rations for loafing. Theos opened his mouth to explain, and then the dragon landed. Not with a roar. Not with destruction. Just a thundering presence that cracked the rock and knocked every tool from every belt in a 30-meter radius. Vents on its spine hissed steam. Its head, scarred, armored, enormous, lowered next to Theos like it was checking to make sure he hadn't gotten lost. The sight froze everyone. Krell screamed and fell into a generator pit. The rest of the crew dove behind equipment, weapons, drills, or each other. Theos just stood there, covered in soot and fear. The dragon didn't so much as blink at the others. It ignored the panicking workers, the alarms, the turret deployments that activated 3 seconds too late. It sniffed Theos again, gave a low, contented rumble, and sat behind him like a watchdog. Like a mountain with teeth. Theos whispered, "I'm not qualified for this." Later that day, after the brass pulled surveillance footage and realized what they were looking at, 3 orbiting capital vessels flagged the incident and dispatched emergency containment units. Because the dragon wasn't just any apex predator. It was Vrexigor, the apex, the world burner, the unhunted. A classified extinction-class organism whose last known appearance had resulted in the fall of 2 war moons and the loss of an entire battalion of biomech infantry. Presumed dead. Officially erased. DNA profile banned for replication. Ancient. Unstoppable. Intelligent. And now it was following around a 21-year-old human apprentice like a puppy that had imprinted on its mother. The galaxy panicked. Theos went back to work. Everywhere he walked, Vrexigor followed. Through bunkhouses, through fuel stations, through waste disposal corridors. It curled up beside his sleeping cot, exhaled heat into his tent when it was cold, and snarled if anyone shouted at him. It didn't attack. It didn't demand. It just watched, as if guarding something precious. As if remembering a life it had once lost and finally found again. By the end of the week, the entire empire knew the name Theos Cade. But Theos? He still thought of himself as the guy just trying to finish his checklist. The empire arrives. The first warship didn't announce itself. It simply appeared above the atmosphere, eclipsing Dragolo's 9 sky with imperial silver and shadow. The second warship sent a warning ping, a message wrapped in layers of legal language and military precision, requesting that the terraforming station prepare for the immediate quarantine and transfer of anomalous biological threat, Apex-class entity, Vrexigor. By the time the third ship arrived, everyone at Ground Station Delta had stopped pretending it was a normal day. Theos sat on a steel crate, chewing his lip and watching Vrexigor sleep in a pile of construction-grade gravel. The beast looked absurd, massive wings tucked in, neck coiled like a scarf around its body, a single lazy eye blinking open now and then just to make sure Theos hadn't wandered off again. 3 weeks ago, Theos couldn't get promoted because he kept failing his diagnostic retention exams. Now entire fleets were orbiting a planet because he had a friend. He tried explaining it first to Krell, then to the station AI, then to the woman who showed up in black body armor and insisted on scanning his skull for psychic bonding anomalies. None of them believed him. They didn't believe he hadn't trained the dragon. They didn't believe he hadn't fed it something illegal or poked it with some arcane tech artifact that rewired its brain. They certainly didn't believe it had just followed him. And they were all terrified. Not of Vrexigor's claws or his fire, which could melt a tank in under 3 seconds, but of his stillness. Because that was what apex predators did before they decided to end something. And for now, all of that terrifying stillness was pointed toward Theos Cade. When command finally came down in person, it wasn't a delegation. It was a battalion. 40 elite guards in reactive exosuits, a floating field command center, 3 mobile biocontainment units, and 1 woman wearing a high-collar cape lined with nerve-threaded command gold. Commander Audrey Voss. Her boots touched the soil like she expected it to kneel. Human designation Theos Cade, she said upon approach, voice echoing through a neural mic that probably cost more than the entire station's budget for 3 cycles. Theos stood, nodding, doing his best not to look like a guy who'd eaten a protein bar off the floor that morning. I need you, she continued, to step 5 meters away from the creature. Now. Vrexigor stirred. Theos held up both hands. Commander Voss, right? I just think that might not be a great idea. She raised a hand, and the exosuit team activated in sync, weapons humming. Theos's heart thundered. Behind him, Vrexigor's tail shifted. His chest expanded. The air heated. Back down, Theos whispered. He's not a weapon. Then you won't mind proving it, Voss said. And then one of her lieutenants made a mistake. He fired a containment tether. Just a warning shot. It grazed the edge of Theos's boot. That was enough. The confrontation. Vrexigor didn't roar. He moved faster than any of them could process, a flash of molten fury crossing the space between Theos and the battalion. His wings snapped open, blocking out the sun, and the temperature spiked so quickly that warning alarms screamed from every exosuit. But he didn't attack. He landed between Theos and the soldiers, head low, eyes burning like twin suns. A sound came from his throat, not quite a growl, not quite speech, but something that made the ground tremble and the air itself seem to bend. The battalion froze. 40 elite warriors, each one trained to face extinction-class threats, stood paralyzed by the sheer presence of something that had once burned worlds. "Stand down!" Voss shouted, but her voice cracked. Her neural mic sparked and died under the electromagnetic pulse of Vrexigor's fury. Theos stepped forward, placing his hand on the dragon's shoulder. The scales were hot enough to melt steel, but they didn't burn him. They never had. "Easy, big guy," he whispered. "They're scared. Just like everyone else." Vrexigor's breathing slowed. The heat dimmed. His massive head turned toward Theos, and for a moment, the most dangerous creature in the galaxy looked like nothing more than a lost pet seeking comfort. "You see?" Theos called to the soldiers. "He only reacts when someone threatens me. He's protecting, not attacking." Commander Voss stepped forward, her hand still on her weapon. "That thing has killed thousands. Entire civilizations have fallen before it. And you expect me to believe it's just, attached to you?" "I don't know why," Theos said honestly. "I was just hauling plasma spools when I found him. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he remembers something from before. I don't understand it either." "The Empire cannot allow this anomaly to continue," Voss said. "Vrexigor must be contained. Studied. Controlled." At the word "contained," Vrexigor's eyes flared. The ground beneath his feet began to smoke. "He understands you," Theos realized. "He knows what you're planning." "Then make him submit," Voss demanded. "Order him to surrender." Theos laughed, the sound bitter and tired. "You think I control him? Commander, I can barely control my own work schedule. He follows me because he chooses to. And right now, he's choosing to keep me safe." The standoff stretched on, tension crackling between the dragon's protective instincts and the Empire's need for control. The battalion held their positions, weapons trained on a creature that could incinerate them all before they could blink. In the distance, more ships were arriving. The entire Imperial fleet, it seemed, was converging on this backwater world because of one apprentice foreman and his impossible friend. "There is another option," Voss said finally, her voice cold and calculating. "The Empress herself has taken interest in this situation. She wishes to meet the human who has tamed the untamable." Theos felt ice in his veins. "The Empress?" "Empress Lyralii of the 7th House. She who commanded the original hunt for Vrexigor decades ago. She who ordered his extinction when he refused to serve." Voss smiled without warmth. "She's coming here," Theos cade. "And she's bringing with her weapons that make our current arsenal look like children's toys." Vrexigor's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. A low, dangerous sound rumbled from his chest, not protective now, but something else. Something that spoke of old wounds and older hatred. "He remembers her," Theos whispered, understanding dawning. "She's the one who tried to kill him. And now she wants to try again," Voss confirmed. "Unless you can convince your friend to come quietly." The dragon's tail lashed, carving deep grooves in the stone. His wings spread wider, casting everything in shadow. For the first time since Theos had found him, Vrexigor looked truly dangerous. "How long do we have?" Theos asked. "She'll be here within the hour." Theos looked up at his unlikely companion, seeing not a monster but a creature that had chosen trust over centuries of solitude. And now that trust was about to be tested by the one person in the galaxy who had already betrayed it once. "Then we'd better be ready," he said quietly. The choice. The Empress arrived like a falling star. Her flagship, the Sovereign's Wrath, descended through Dragolos IX's atmosphere with ceremonial precision, its hull gleaming with psychic amplifiers and reality-warping weaponry. The smaller vessels of her fleet formed a perfect sphere around the planet, each one bristling with enough firepower to crack continents. Empress Lyralii stepped onto the surface wearing armor that seemed to bend light around itself, her presence rippling with barely contained power. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, sharp edges and cruel intelligence wrapped in elegant form. She looked at Theos with eyes like winter storms and spoke with a voice that could command gravity itself. "So you are the one who has stolen my dragon." Vrexigor rose to his full height at her words, wings spreading wide enough to cast shadows across the entire compound. His roar shook the ground and sent several soldiers to their knees, but Lyralii didn't even flinch. "Hello, old friend," she said to the dragon, and her smile was cold as vacuum. "I see death has agreed with you. Though you're smaller than I remember." The dragon's response was a sound like breaking worlds, but underneath the fury, Theos heard something else. Pain. A wound that had never healed. "What did you do to him?" Theos demanded, stepping forward despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "I offered him everything," Lyralii said. "An empire to rule, worlds to claim, power beyond imagining. All he had to do was serve." Her expression hardened. "He chose freedom instead. So I chose war." The battle that followed had lasted 3 years, she explained. Vrexigor against the combined might of 12 star systems. In the end, they'd cornered him above a dying world, battered and broken, and Lyralii herself had delivered what she thought was the killing blow. "But dragons are difficult to kill completely," she mused. "They have a way of lingering, don't they? Sleeping until something calls them back." "He wasn't called back," Theos said. "He chose to come back. For you." Lyralii laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "A maintenance worker? How wonderfully absurd." She raised her hand, and reality bent around her fingers. Power that could reshape matter at the molecular level, that could stop time itself, focused into a weapon aimed directly at Theos. "I could simply kill you, of course. Without his precious human to protect, Vrexigor would have no choice but to serve or die." Again. Vrexigor moved to shield Theos, but Lyralii's power wrapped around them both like chains of crystallized space. The dragon struggled against bonds that held him more surely than any physical restraint. "But where's the poetry in that?" she continued. "No, I think I'll offer you the same choice I once offered him. Serve willingly, and you both live. Your dragon becomes the weapon I always intended him to be, and you, well, you can watch. Refuse, and I'll kill you slowly enough that he feels every moment of it." Theos looked up at Vrexigor, seeing the ancient pain in those molten eyes. The dragon had already made this choice once, had chosen freedom over power, defiance over safety. And it had cost him everything. Now the choice was Theos's to make. "There's a third option," he said quietly. Lyralii raised an eyebrow. "Oh. You could just leave us alone." The Empress threw back her head and laughed. "Leave you alone? Do you have any idea what you're asking? This creature could burn galaxies. In the wrong hands, he could." "In the wrong hands?" Theos interrupted. "Like yours?" The laughter stopped. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. "Careful, boy. I am being generous because I find this situation amusing. That generosity has limits. So does his patience," Theos said, nodding toward Vrexigor. The dragon had gone very still. Not the stillness of submission, but the perfect quiet that came before an avalanche. His eyes were locked on Lyralii, and in their depths, Theos could see the memory of their last battle. The pain of betrayal. The rage of the betrayed. "He's not going to let you hurt me," Theos realized. "Even if it kills him." Again. "Then perhaps I should." Vrexigor moved. The psychic chains shattered like glass. The Empress's reality-warping field collapsed under the sheer force of his will. And for the first time in decades, Lyralii looked genuinely surprised. The dragon didn't attack her. Instead, he wrapped his wing around Theos and spoke, not in words, but in images that burned themselves directly into both their minds. Memories of loneliness. Of sleeping in cold stone for decades, dreaming of warmth and companionship. Of waking to find a frightened young man who had looked at him without hatred, without greed. Who had whispered, "Hey," like he was talking to a friend instead of a monster. And then, more than memories. A promise. A choice freely made. Vrexigor would not serve the Empress again. But neither would he run. This time, he would protect what mattered to him, no matter the cost. The dragon's declaration hit Lyralii like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her perfect composure cracking. You would choose this? This nothing of a human over an empire? The answer came not in words but in action. Vrexigor lowered his head to nuzzle against Theos's shoulder, and the gesture was so gentle, so unmistakably affectionate, that even the hardened soldiers around them seemed to soften. Yes, Theos said, understanding. He chooses me. And I choose him. For a long moment, the Empress stared at them both. Then, slowly, she began to smile. But this smile was different, not cruel or calculating, but something almost like wonder. Fascinating, she murmured. In all my years, in all my conquests, I have never seen anything quite like this. Pure loyalty, freely given. No contracts, no compulsion, no reward except companionship. She looked around at her fleet, her soldiers, her vast empire built on fear and obligation. Perhaps, she said finally, I have been asking the wrong questions all along. The Empress stepped back, her armor dimming to a softer light. Very well, Theos Cade. You and your dragon may keep each other. But know this, the galaxy is watching. Others will come, seeking to claim what they cannot understand. Can you protect him as fiercely as he protects you? Theos looked up at Vrexigor, seeing intelligence and trust and something that might have been hope. We'll protect each other, he said. And with that, the most powerful woman in the galaxy nodded once and walked away, leaving behind an apprentice foreman, a legendary dragon, and the beginning of a story that would be told across the stars for generations to come. As the Imperial fleet departed and Dragolos 9 returned to its quiet existence, Theos went back to his checklist. The plasma spools still needed to be moved, the coolant leak still needed patching. But now he wasn't alone. Vrexigor helped where he could, his flame could weld metal in seconds, and nothing stayed broken for long when you had a dragon for a maintenance partner. Sometimes, Theos would catch glimpses of other ships in the distance, drawn by curiosity or greed or wonder. But Vrexigor would simply look at them with those ancient, patient eyes, and somehow they always decided they had business elsewhere. In the evenings, they would sit together on the ridge where they first met, watching the red dwarf set over the terraformed landscape. Theos would tell Vrexigor about his day, about the small victories and minor frustrations that made up a life lived quietly. And Vrexigor would listen, sometimes humming deep in his chest, a sound like contentment made audible. They had found something rare in the galaxy, not just friendship, but understanding. A place where a man could be more than his failures and a dragon could be more than his legend. And in the end, that was worth more than any empire. The end.